Part 1. A day like any other. The bustling city streets hummed with life as Iris Hudson navigated her way through the crowd. The sun was high, casting a warm glow over the skyscrapers and sidewalks teeming with activity. To any passerby, it was just another ordinary day in the city. People rushing from one place to the next, traffic snarling in its usual chaotic rhythm. But for Iris, today felt different. There was a tension in the air, subtle but tangible, as if the world around her was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. She adjusted the strap of her leather handbag over her shoulder, feeling the familiar weight of it against her side. Iris was always prepared, meticulous and organized, a trait she'd honed during her years working for the mayor's office. Every detail mattered in her line of work, and nothing was left to chance. She had a reputation for being thorough, for never letting anything slip through the cracks. Today was supposed to be simple, a quick stop at the boutique before heading home for the weekend. She'd been eyeing a particular dress for weeks now, something elegant yet understated that she could wear to the upcoming gala. It wasn't often that she indulged herself, but after the week she'd had, endless meetings, crises that seemed to multiply, and the constant pressure of politics, she felt she'd earned it. The boutique stood at the corner of an upscale district, its large glass windows displaying perfectly styled mannequins draped in the latest fashions. The store had an air of exclusivity about it, the kind of place where wealthy socialites and executives shopped without a second thought. Iris wasn't a regular, but she had the means to treat herself when she wanted to, and today was one of those rare occasions. As she pushed open the door, a cool blast of air conditioning greeted her, the soft chime of the bell signaling her entrance. The store was quiet, with only a few customers browsing the racks of clothes. Soft music played overhead, creating an atmosphere of calm sophistication. Iris walked toward the back, her eyes scanning the racks for the dress she'd come for. It didn't take long to find it. Navy blue, simple yet elegant, with clean lines that suited her perfectly. She pulled it off the hanger and held it against her, admiring the way the fabric draped in her reflection from a nearby mirror. But just as she was about to head to the fitting rooms, a voice cut through the peaceful ambiance. "Excuse me, ma'am," came the sharp voice of a man. Iris turned to see a store employee approaching her, a tall, thin man with a stern expression. His name tag read Martin. "I'll need to take your bag before you head into the fitting room." Iris blinked, caught off guard by the sudden request. "My bag?" she repeated, her voice even. "Yes, store policy," Martin said, though there was something in his tone that felt more like an accusation than a simple request. "We ask all customers to leave their bags at the counter before trying on any items." Iris glanced around the store, noting the other shoppers. None of them were being asked to leave their belongings. A woman near the entrance, dressed in designer clothes and carrying an expensive handbag, strolled casually through the aisles without so much as a glance from the staff. "Is that so?" Iris asked, her brow furrowing slightly. "Because I don't see anyone else being asked to hand over their bags." Martin's expression didn't change, though his posture stiffened. "We reserve the right to enforce our policies at our discretion." The implication hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Iris felt her stomach twist with a familiar sense of anger, a slow burn that she had learned to control over the years. She had faced this kind of treatment before, subtle but insidious, the kind of discrimination that was wrapped in polite language and false professionalism. She took a deep breath, keeping her voice steady. "I'm not leaving my bag. I'll try the dress on, and if you have any concerns, you can deal with them then." For a moment, Martin hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the counter as if considering his next move. Before he could respond, a second figure appeared, Bridget Golden, the store manager. Her heels clicked sharply on the polished floor as she approached, her smile thin and insincere. "Is there a problem here?" Bridget asked, though the way her eyes raked over Iris's appearance made it clear she had already decided there was. "No problem," Iris said calmly, though the tension in her chest was building. "I'm simply trying to purchase a dress." Bridget's smile didn't waver, but her gaze hardened. "I see. Well, we do have policies in place for security reasons, especially for high-end merchandise. I'm sure you understand." Iris met her gaze, unflinching. "I understand that I'm being treated differently than other customers in this store, and I'm not sure." The room seemed to go still for a moment, the quiet music overhead suddenly too soft to mask the thick silence between them. Bridget's smile faltered just for a second, but she quickly regained her composure. "I assure you, ma'am, that's not the case. We apply our policies equally to everyone." Iris held her ground, her voice steady. Then I'd like to see you enforce it with the other customers in here too. Bridget's eyes flashed with irritation, but before she could respond, Martin stepped forward, his tone sharper now. Ma'am, if you're not going to comply, we'll have to ask you to leave the store. Iris's jaw clenched, the weight of the situation settling heavily on her. She had been here before, in restaurants, in shops, even in her own neighborhood. The quiet, pervasive racism that was so carefully hidden beneath layers of civility and decorum. But she wasn't going to back down, not this time. I'm not leaving, Iris said firmly, and I'm not handing over my bag. Bridget's smile disappeared completely, her tone turning cold. Then I'm afraid we'll have to involve the authorities. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, share it with others, and let us know your thoughts or experiences in the comments below. Your voice matters. Part 2. Power Games. As soon as the words left Bridget's lips, Iris felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. The authorities? Over a disagreement in a boutique? It was absurd, and yet here it was, unfolding in real time. The realization that they were willing to escalate this situation beyond reason made her stomach churn with a mix of anger and frustration. Iris glanced around the store, taking in the other shoppers who had paused to watch the confrontation unfold. Their eyes flickered between her and the staff, some curious, others indifferent. She could feel the weight of their silent judgment pressing down on her, and it made her blood boil. This wasn't about a dress anymore. This was about control, about asserting power in a situation where she had done nothing wrong. Bridget's eyes were on her, sharp and calculating, as if daring Iris to make a move that would justify the escalation. But Iris wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. Do what you have to do, Iris said, her voice steady but firm. But I'm not going anywhere. Bridget's smile returned, thin and insincere. She turned to Martin, nodding toward the phone behind the counter. Martin, call Officer Pierce. Martin's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of hesitation crossing his face before he nodded and turned to make the call. The store fell into an uncomfortable silence, the tension palpable as Iris stood her ground. She could feel the stares from the other customers, some sympathetic, others uncomfortable, but no one stepped in. No one challenged what was happening. They were content to watch from the sidelines, silent witnesses to an injustice they didn't want to get involved in. It wasn't long before the front doors of the store swung open, and Officer Pierce strode in. He was tall, with a broad, muscular frame that seemed to fill the room as he walked. His expression was hard, his eyes scanning the store before landing on Iris. Bridget wasted no time in stepping forward, her voice smooth and practiced as she explained the situation to Officer Pierce. We've had an issue with this customer, Bridget said, her tone dripping with false concern. She's refused to comply with our store policies, and we'd like her removed. Pierce's eyes flickered over Iris, his expression unreadable, but there was something in the way he looked at her that made her stomach drop. He didn't see her as a customer. He didn't see her as someone who had been wronged. He saw her as a problem. Ma'am, Pierce said, his voice firm but not unkind. I'm going to ask you to step outside so we can discuss this. Iris's pulse quickened, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew where this was going. She had seen it before, how quickly things could escalate, how easily a situation like this could spiral out of control. But she wasn't going to back down. I haven't done anything wrong, Iris said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. I'm being targeted because of the color of my skin. And I won't be treated like a criminal. Pierce's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. This isn't about that, ma'am. This is about following store policy. Is it? Iris shot back, her voice rising. Because I didn't see anyone else being asked to hand over their bag. Just me. Bridget stepped forward, her tone icy. We enforce our policies at our discretion, based on what we believe is necessary for the security of our merchandise. Iris turned to Pierce, her eyes flashing with anger. And you're just going to take her word for it? You're not even going to ask for my side of the story? For a moment, Pierce hesitated. There was a brief flicker of doubt in his eyes, as if he knew that something wasn't right. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the cold, detached professionalism of someone who had made up their mind. Ma'am, Pierce said, his voice low and firm. I'm not going to ask you again. Please step outside, or I'll have to take further action. The room seemed to shrink around Iris, the walls closing in as the gravity of the situation pressed down on her. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her, the customers, the staff, even Pierce. They were waiting for her to make a mistake, waiting for her to give them a reason to escalate. But Iris wasn't going to give them that. Part 3. The breaking point. The atmosphere inside the boutique was suffocating. Every pair of eyes seemed to be locked on Iris, waiting for her next move. The calm, sophisticated ambiance of the store had been replaced by a charged tension thick enough to cut through. Iris's pulse pounded in her ears as Officer Pierce stood before her, towering over her with the weight of the law on his side. But the law wasn't on her side. At least, not here. Not now. Iris had spent her life navigating systems of power, learning how to read the unspoken rules that govern spaces like these. She had learned to keep her head high, to speak firmly and clearly when challenged. But she also knew how quickly things could spiral when someone in authority, like Officer Pierce, decided to escalate. She could see it in his eyes, the flicker of impatience, the subtle tightening of his jaw. She had seen it before, and it always ended the same way. "Ma'am," Officer Pierce repeated, his voice growing colder with every word. "This is your last warning. Step outside with me, or I will have to place you under arrest for trespassing." Trespassing? Iris's mind raced, trying to make sense of the absurdity. How had a simple shopping trip turned into this? She hadn't done anything wrong. She hadn't broken any laws. But in this moment, surrounded by judgmental stares and the rigid authority of Officer Pierce, none of that seemed to matter. She looked over at Bridget, who stood with her arms folded, an expression of smug satisfaction plastered across her face. Martin hovered nearby, his gaze flicking nervously between Iris and Pierce, clearly enjoying the show but not wanting to get too close. This wasn't just about a dress or a bag. This was about power, about reminding Iris of her place, of who they thought she was and what they believed she deserved. Iris straightened her spine, her voice steady despite the rising panic in her chest. "I haven't broken any law. I'm a paying customer in this store, and I'm being treated unfairly. If you want to arrest me, then go ahead, but you'll have to answer for it." Officer Pierce's eyes flashed with something, anger perhaps, or frustration. He was used to compliance, to people backing down when he threw his weight around. But Iris wasn't backing down. She wasn't going to let him intimidate her into submission. "Iris, please," came a quiet voice from behind her. Iris turned to see one of the other customers, a woman she hadn't noticed before, stepping forward. She was older, with gray hair and kind eyes, but her expression was one of concern. "It's not worth it," the woman said softly. "Please, just go with him. Don't make it worse." Iris felt a pang of bitterness in her chest. Not worth it. How many times had she heard that phrase? How many times had people told her to keep her head down, to let things slide, to avoid making trouble? It was always easier for them to say, people who didn't have to live under the constant scrutiny, who didn't know what it was like to be judged before they even opened their mouths. But Iris wasn't one of them. She couldn't afford to let this go, to walk away and pretend it didn't matter. Because it did matter. Every time she was treated this way, every time someone like Bridget or Officer Pierce tried to assert their power over her, it mattered. "I'm not going anywhere," Iris said firmly, her gaze locked on Officer Pierce. "I know my rights, and I won't be bullied." Pierce's patience snapped. Without another word, he reached for his handcuffs, his movements swift and mechanical. Iris's heart pounded in her chest as she saw him close the distance between them. Her mind raced. She had to act, had to say something before this situation spiraled further out of control. But before she could speak, her phone buzzed in her pocket. The sudden vibration startled her, momentarily breaking the tense silence that had settled over the store. With shaking hands, Iris pulled out her phone, her eyes widening as she saw the name flashing on the screen, District Attorney's Office. Without hesitation, she answered the call. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was calm, steady, and authoritative. "Iris, this is Assistant District Attorney Green. We've been informed about the situation. Is Officer Pierce there with you?" Iris's breath caught in her throat. "Yes, he's here." "Good," Green replied, his voice firm but reassuring. "Hand the phone to him, now." Iris didn't hesitate. She extended the phone toward Officer Pierce, her eyes locking with his. "The District Attorney's Office would like a word." For a moment, Pierce hesitated. His expression shifted, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face as he stared at the phone in Iris's hand. The power dynamic had shifted and he knew it. Slowly, reluctantly, he took the phone from her. "This is Officer Pierce," he said into the receiver, his voice flat. Iris couldn't hear what was being said on the other end of the line. But she watched as Pierce's posture stiffened. His eyes darted toward Bridget, who had been standing nearby, her smug expression slowly melting into one of confusion. Martin, meanwhile, seemed to shrink into the background, clearly regretting having gotten involved in the first place. "Yes, sir," Pierce muttered into the phone, his voice growing quieter. "I understand. I didn't realize. Yes, sir. I'll take care of it." When Pierce handed the phone back to Iris, the tension in the room had shifted dramatically. The authority he had wielded so confidently only moments ago was gone, replaced with something closer to fear. "You're free to go," Pierce said, his tone clipped. "There's been a misunderstanding." Iris didn't move at first, her mind struggling to process the sudden shift. "A misunderstanding?" Pierce's jaw tightened. "You're not under arrest. You're free to leave." The store had fallen deathly silent. The customers who had been watching from the sidelines now looked away, their curiosity replaced with discomfort. Bridget's face had gone pale, her mouth opening and closing as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Iris straightened her shoulders, her heart still pounding but her mind clear. She had stood her ground, and now, finally, she was being treated like the person she was, not a suspect, not a criminal, but a woman who knew her rights. Without another word, Iris turned and walked toward the door. She could feel the eyes of the entire store on her as she left, but she didn't care. She had won. But as she stepped out into the bright sunlight, her victory felt hollow. She had fought for her dignity, for her right to be treated as an equal. But the fact that she had to fight it all left a bitter taste in her mouth. The world outside the boutique continued as if nothing had happened. People walking by, cars honking in the distance. But Iris knew that something had changed. This wasn't just about her, about one woman standing up against injustice. This was about a system that allowed people like Bridget, Martin, and Officer Pierce to act with impunity. Iris looked down at her phone, still clutched in her hand, and a thought crossed her mind. She wasn't done yet. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, share it with others, and let us know your thoughts or experiences in the comments below. Your voice matters. Part 4. The aftermath. The following days were a whirlwind. The incident at the boutique had spread like wildfire. Local news stations picked up the story, and before long, it had made its way to national outlets. It was a story that resonated with so many, an example of racial profiling, the misuse of authority, and the courage it took to stand up against both. Iris found herself at the center of a storm she hadn't expected. Reporters called her office, asking for statements, wanting to know how she felt about the incident. Activist groups reached out, offering their support and encouraging her to use her platform to speak out against the systemic issues that allowed situations like hers to happen in the first place. But while the world outside buzzed with excitement and outrage, Iris felt a deep weariness settle over her. She hadn't wanted this. She hadn't wanted to become a symbol for anything. She had just wanted to buy a dress, to live her life without being treated like she didn't belong. Her phone buzzed again, a text from her friend and colleague Lydia, asking how she was holding up. Iris glanced at the message but didn't respond. She appreciated the concern, but she didn't have the energy to explain what she was feeling. Not yet. The mayor's office had been supportive, of course. They'd issued a statement condemning the actions of the boutique staff and Officer Pierce, praising Iris for her bravery. But even that felt hollow to her. It wasn't enough to issue statements. It wasn't enough to talk about change. Change had to be fought for, tooth and nail, every single day. She sat in her apartment, staring at the dress she had bought, a symbol of what should have been a simple, pleasant day. But now, it was tangled up with memories of confrontation, of the humiliation she had faced, just for existing in a space where people didn't think she belonged. Her phone buzzed again, this time, a call. She sighed, picking it up and answering without looking at the caller ID. "Hello? Iris, it's Green." The familiar voice of the assistant district attorney brought her back to the present. "Green," she said, her voice tired. "What can I do for you?" "I wanted to talk about what happened at the boutique," Green said, his tone businesslike but with an underlying warmth. "We've opened an investigation into Officer Pierce's conduct. He crossed a line, and we're going to make sure there are consequences." Iris's heart skipped a beat. She had known this was a possibility, but hearing it made the reality of the situation sink in. "What kind of consequences?" "Administrative leave, possibly more," Green replied. "The department wants to avoid a public scandal, especially with everything that's been going on lately. But you and I both know, that this is bigger than just one officer. This is about systemic issues, about how people like Pierce and those boutique employees can get away with this kind of behavior. Iris nodded, though Green couldn't see her. I know. And I think you have a platform here, Green continued. People are listening. This is your chance to speak out, to push for real change. Iris closed her eyes, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't wanted to become a symbol. But maybe Green was right. Maybe this was bigger than her, bigger than just one incident. I don't know if I'm ready for that, Iris admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. You're stronger than you think, Green said, his voice gentle but firm. You've already shown that. Now it's time to show the world. Part 5. Facing the system. The days following the boutique incident were a blur of media appearances, meetings, and conversations Iris never expected to have. She had gone from being a dedicated public servant working quietly behind the scenes to a symbol of a much larger struggle. The weight of it all felt overwhelming at times, but each day she found the strength to push forward. The assistant district attorney, Green, had been right. Iris had a platform now, and the world was watching. But she wasn't naive. She knew that public attention was fleeting, and the opportunity to create real change wouldn't last forever. If she wanted to make a difference, she had to act now. Sitting in her office, Iris stared at the email draft she had been working on for hours. It was a message to the mayor, outlining her proposal for a citywide initiative to address racial profiling and police misconduct. The idea had come to her during one of her sleepless nights, as she thought about all the times she had been made to feel like an outsider in her own city. The boutique incident was just one example. There were thousands more, stories like hers that never made it to the news. But creating an initiative was one thing. Getting it approved, funded, and implemented was another battle entirely. The mayor had been supportive in public, issuing statements condemning the actions of Officer Pierce and the boutique staff. But Iris knew how politics worked. Words were easy. Real action was harder to come by. If she was going to get this initiative off the ground, she would need more than just the mayor's approval. She would need the support of the city council, the police department, and the community. And that was the biggest challenge of all. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Lydia, her colleague and closest friend at the mayor's office. Lydia, you've got this. I know you do. Call me if you need anything. Iris smiled at the message, her heart swelling with gratitude. Lydia had been her rock throughout this entire ordeal, offering words of encouragement and support when Iris felt like the weight of it all was too much to bear. Taking a deep breath, Iris hit send on the email. There was no turning back. Later that evening, Iris met with Green in his office to discuss the progress of the investigation into Officer Pierce. The room was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of papers as Green reviewed the latest reports. He's been placed on administrative leave, Green said, glancing up at Iris. It's not much, but it's a start. The internal investigation is still ongoing, and we're pushing for stronger disciplinary action. Iris nodded, though she couldn't help but feel a sense of frustration. Administrative leave felt like a slap on the wrist. Officer Pierce had violated her rights, humiliated her in public, and yet he still had his job. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough. What about Bridget and Martin? Iris asked. The boutique employees. Green sighed, leaning back in his chair. That's a bit more complicated. The boutique is privately owned, and while we can push for civil action, there's only so much we can do legally. But public pressure is building. People are calling for boycotts, and I wouldn't be surprised if the store is forced to shut down soon. Iris frowned. While the thought of the boutique facing consequences brought some satisfaction, it wasn't the end goal she had in mind. This wasn't just about punishing a few individuals. It was about addressing the larger systemic issues that allowed these kinds of incidents to happen in the first place. Green, Iris said, her voice steady. I want to do more. I don't want this to be just another news story that fades away. I want real change. Green looked at her, his expression thoughtful. And how do you plan to do that? I've already started drafting a proposal for a citywide initiative, Iris explained. It would focus on addressing racial profiling, improving police accountability, and creating resources for people who have experienced discrimination. But I need support, real support, from the city, from the mayor, from the police department. I can't do this alone. Green smiled, a hint of admiration in his eyes. You're not alone, Iris. You've got people behind you. And you're right, this is bigger than just one incident. But if anyone can make this happen, it's you. Iris felt a surge of determination course through her. She had come too far to back down now. Part 6. The proposal the day of the city council meeting arrived faster than Iris expected. She had spent weeks preparing, gathering data, speaking with activists, community leaders, and legal experts. The proposal she had drafted was ambitious, an initiative that would create new training programs for police officers, establish an independent oversight committee to investigate misconduct, and provide resources for victims of discrimination. As she stood in front of the city council, her heart raced. The room was packed with people, supporters, reporters, even a few detractors. This was her moment to make her case, to push for the change that so many people desperately needed. She glanced at the mayor, who sat at the front of the room, watching her closely. His expression was neutral, but Iris could sense the pressure he was under. Supporting her proposal would be a bold move, one that could alienate some of his more conservative allies. But Iris wasn't here to play politics. She was here to do what was right. Taking a deep breath, Iris began her presentation. For far too long, people in our city, people who look like me, have been treated as less than, she said, her voice steady but powerful. We've been subjected to racial profiling, discrimination, and abuse of power. And while we've made progress, it's not enough. The system that allows these injustices to happen is still in place, and it's time for that to change. She outlined the key points of her proposal: the need for accountability, for transparency, for systemic reform. She spoke about her own experience at the boutique, but more importantly, she spoke about the countless others who had faced similar treatment and never had the chance to tell their stories. This isn't just about one incident, Iris continued. This is about creating a city where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of the color of their skin. It's about ensuring that those in positions of power are held accountable when they abuse that power. And it's about making sure that no one has to go through what I went through ever again. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then, slowly, people began to clap. It started with Lydia, who was sitting in the front row, her eyes shining with pride. Then others joined in, community leaders, activists, even a few members of the city council. But the mayor remained silent. Iris's heart pounded in her chest as she waited for his response. This was the moment of truth. The mayor's support was crucial if her proposal was going to move forward. Finally, the mayor stood, his expression unreadable. He glanced around the room before turning to Iris. "You've made a compelling case," he said, his voice calm but authoritative. "And I believe that this city can and should do better. I support your proposal, and I will work with you to ensure that it becomes a reality." The applause that followed was thunderous. Part 7. A new beginning. Months later, the city looked different. The initiative that Iris had fought for had passed, and the changes were already being felt. Police officers were undergoing new training programs designed to address implicit bias and de-escalation tactics. The Oversight Committee had been established, and it was already investigating several cases of misconduct. Resources for victims of discrimination had been expanded, providing support for those who had been marginalized for far too long. It wasn't perfect. There was still a long way to go, and Iris knew that the fight for justice would never be over. But for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. She had done something that mattered, something that would make a difference in the lives of countless people. As she stood on the steps of City Hall, watching the sunset over the skyline, Iris allowed herself a moment of peace. She had fought for this city, for the people in it, and she had won. But more than that, she had proven to herself that she was stronger than she ever knew. The challenges she had faced had only made her more determined, more resilient. Lydia appeared beside her, a soft smile on her face. "You did it," she said quietly. "We did it," Iris corrected, her voice full of gratitude. Together they watched as the city buzzed with life, the future full of possibility. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, share it with others, and let us know your thoughts or experiences in the comments below. Your voice matters.